What you'll need for constructing the rhombus is enough either yardstick or trim, whichever you prefer to use, which is reasonably, sturdy and straight. Make sure you check it along the length for straightness. Enough to construct 4 18-inch pieces, which will make up the side of the rhombus. You'll need extra pieces of the yardstick in order to calibrate your table saw in order to make the notch for the wire. You'll also need the safety equipment for using the table saw, which is earplugs and safety glasses. You'll need scissors, wax paper, your contact cement. You'll need some epoxy, plus the mixing tools for the epoxy. Tape. The important tape here is a packaging tape for making the hinges of the rhombus. What you want is a tape that's easy to bend, okay, but doesn't stretch. It's very non-stretchable along the dimension of the tape. It's a non-stretchy tape. So don't use masking tape, because masking tape is too stretchy. Okay, but the tape has to be non-stretchy but able to bend, because that's going to form our hinge. So I'm using this Scotch mailing tape. You'll need 22 gauge magnet wire. Now this looks like bare copper wire. It's not. This wire has a very thin enamel insulative coating that we have to scrape off before we can solder to it. And it's called magnet wire because it's used to make electromagnets. The thin lacquer allows you to put many more turns because it's a very thin insulation. You'll need brass number 6 washers, and I think I've covered it. Oh, and you'll need the instrument, this instrument for determining the size of the notch. Now the size of the notch is based on the wire, and the wire comes out to about a little less than 0.03 inches. So what we're going to do, we're going to make the notch 0.04 inches to allow a little room for adhesive. And that's how we're going to set up the notches on the table saw. Now when you set up the table saw, because we're going to be making a very, very fine notch, we don't want to run the table saw from this end because there's very little support for the piece near the blade. So we want to cut from this side so the piece is fully supported by the red area, and therefore our notch won't be subject to the wobbling of this thing as it's pushed across. So we're going to move the gate to the other side. What you're going to do then is you're going to adjust the depth of the table saw in order to notch. And we're going to use these throwaway pieces of the trim or yardstick to calibrate the setup of the saw to make sure that we're only going to be cutting into this side 0.4 inches. We can go a little bit deeper in this dimension as long as we make sure we're only going 0.4 in this dimension. So the first thing we're going to do is just get the depth right. The way we're going to get the depth right is we're going to measure the thickness of the yardstick prior to cutting. And the yardstick is just short of 1/4 inch, 0.240 inches. Okay, so that makes our life easy because we want to take off 0.04, which means we want to get it back to exactly 0.2 inches. Okay, so then we're going to run this until we get a depth of 0.2 inches. So let's do that now. You don't have to go all the way in. Oh, I hit it on the first shot. Excellent. We're there. And what's our depth in this dimension? Okay, our width is 1.45, and so we want to get it down to a little lower than that. Alright, so let's get it to Let's just bring it all the way down to 1.4 inches. So we've got to come back 0.2 inches. So now we're adjusting the height of the cut. Using a clean side. Now you don't have to go all the way in. That's good enough. The more important thing is the depth in this dimension, which is right on the money. We're a little bit deeper on this side. That's okay. All right, so now we can cut our yardsticks that we're going to use for the actual sides. Change the setting on your table saw. We're going to use it again exactly the way it's set up. Then using a miter saw, cut the two yardsticks exactly in half, or if you're using trim, cut them to be exactly 18-inch sections. These yardsticks that I picked are just a little bit longer than 36 inches. Therefore, when I cut it right down the middle, and I measured it separately from the scale on the yardsticks to make sure it's exactly in the center, I should be almost nearly 18 inches on each part that's remaining. And I'm going to cut them both at the same time. And they should come out exactly the same. Perfect. And just double checking to see what we ended up with. It is just a slight bit short of 18. It's not even worth worrying about. Okay, so now here's our 4 rhombus sides with the notch for the wire. And we're going to put these together with the tape as hinges to make this into the rhombus. One thing we're going to do first, though, is we're going to take this notch using the table saw and wrap the notch around each edge. I'll show you how to do that. Okay, this next step may be unnecessary, I don't know. I'm adding it just to give a little more clearance for the wire at the hinge sides. So what we're basically going to do is where the notch is, we're going to take off, run this through like this to take off the sides. In other words, to wrap the notch around the ends of the 18-inch sections. So I'm going to do that now. I'm not going to bother filming it. Well, I'll film one. I'll give you a close-up. You can see how the notch, you can tell by the discoloration of the wood, the notch rolls around the edge. That's going to give us clearance, so when this thing flexes, it'll give place for the wire to go. And we're going to do that for all 4 sections. All right, to make the hinges, what you need to do is take 2 18-inch sections, put them side by side like this. Use an unused portion of the throwaway to keep them perfectly straight, or reasonably perfectly straight. Take your tape that you're going to use for your hinge and get rid of the stuff at the end because that's been... I'm going to get a nice section about 3 inches long. Actually, you want to put probably the straight edge near the notch. And make sure the notches are on the same side. And we don't want to cover the notches with the tape. Okay, the notches are going to be on the inside of the rhombus, in case you haven't already figured that out. Okay, once you get that on there, then cut off the excess. Probably an X-Acto knife would be better here. And once it's still lined up, you fold the tape, fold them together so that the notches come together. You make sure they line up, okay, and squeeze them together. Make sure they're still nicely lined up. Then you get another piece of tape, I don't know, about 6 inches long. Yeah, make it 5-ish. And you wrap this around the outside. And that it's going to become your hinge. Okay, that's going to form the hinge of the rhombus. Make sure you tap it down real tight. Yeah, use an X-Acto knife, don't use scissors. Okay, and you're going to do that for all the other corners of the rhombus, or hinges of the rhombus rather. Now, the next step we're going to do is apply the contact cement. And what you're going to do is you're going to just fold up the rhombus along one edge after you have all the hinges on, and make sure there's no tape in the notch. So we're going to put it together so that the notch is running along the top. Then what you're going to do is take your contact cement And holding the two pieces of the rhombus together, you're just going to work this into the notch. I have a piece of paper towel handy because when we're ready, when we're done putting it on, make sure it gets down into the notch. Okay, once you're done painting it in, and gently open up the rhombus, and using a piece of paper towel, clean off any excess on the inside lip. I don't really care too much about the top. I just don't want the rhombus sticking together. Sorry, I'm blocking the camera. Okay, once it's apart, probably a good idea to use a flashlight. Inspect the notch to make sure you didn't miss any parts. Alright, leaving it apart, let the contact cement set up for at least 15 minutes, and then we'll put the wire in. Alright, then what you want to do, after the adhesive sets, or to the point where it's tacky without being wet, you want to get a piece of 12 inches of material, just to put it in there, just to keep the rhombus open at the halfway point. The reason for this is when we make the wire transitions at the hinge points, we want them to be 50% stressed. Because when we operate this rhombus, it's either going to be all the way closed or all the way open like a square. So we don't want to make the wire at the hinge points, either one of those extremes. We want to make the wires at the hinge points at the 50% mark, so that they have the maximum play. First thing you're going to do is at this end, we're going to make this narrow end our lead end. So we're going to begin by getting our wire, and we're going to leave 2 inches on this end, beyond the end, or a little bit more, but we're going to cut it, and then start laying the wire into the adhesive. Okay, let me put this on pause. It's hard to do this with the camera in the way. The camera at the better angle. So you stretch out the wire all the way beyond the first hinge point, and then using your thumbnail, just force it into the notch, into the adhesive in the notch. Now, when you come to the corner, I'm going to figure out how to do this. What you want to do is get a pair of needle nose pliers, and right at the corner, you want to bend it straight up in the air. Then about a ½ inch above that, you want to bend it straight back. Kind of hard to do, the wire is very thick. Okay, then down at the bottom you want to edge it nice and corner it like that, and then continue on to the next side. I got to get the camera out of the way because I can't do this with the camera in the way. Each of your corners should look like this. And what we're going to do, we're going to forego the epoxy. What I was going to do is reinforce the ends here with epoxy because this is under a little bit of tension and that might break loose, but I'm thinking between the contact adhesive and just wrapping the complete end next to it with cellophane tape, I can at least make this rhombus last through one measurement, which is really all we need it for. So that's how you do each end. Then what you do, then take your leads end after you've already put the cellophane tape on and just gently twist the wires together for about an inch. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to snip these right about here, right about the inch mark, and then we're going to solder on the brass washers like we did in the quad loop experiment to reinforce the ends. I'm not going to show that. If you want to see how that's done, just go review the quad loop experiment video. I think we're done. We're just going to let it cure. And also, always go back through every now and again just to make sure the wire, because if you have kinks in the wire, it'll continue to pop up. Just make sure you keep pushing the wire back into the adhesive until the adhesive cures. So come back and check it like every 5 minutes or so. If you find a section that keeps popping out because the wire's kinked, we'll just use a piece of adhesive tape just to hold it down until the glue cures. And that's basically, other than the loops on the end, that's where we're going to end the construction for the rhombus. Next we're going to get into measuring the rhombus.